Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Power and Motor Guy podcast. I'm your host, Editor-in-Chief Dan Harding. Today's guest is another interesting one. I think that's how I started about every podcast so far, but I genuinely believe it. And today's guest is interesting for a couple reasons. One, she's a colleague and friend. Two, somebody I talk to on a regular basis, though can't say any of our conversations have ever warranted a sit-down interview podcast style. Today's guest is managing editor of Sail Magazine, Lydia Mullan. And I know what you're thinking. Dan, Sail Magazine, really? We're going to have a sailor on the pod? But before you click off, give me a chance here. She's not only an up-and-coming marine journalist and really becoming an accomplished sailor, but today she has a really harrowing story to tell. She recently participated in the infamous Newport to Bermuda race in the hopes of reporting on the event for Sail Magazine, but also using this as an opportunity to bolster her offshore racing resume. And she did what editors aren't supposed to do and became part of the story. Everything was going well. The race was underway until 0300 when the boat was racing along at night, hit a submerged object, and all of a sudden, on a dime, they will go from enjoying a race to trying to keep the boat afloat. I'm going to save the story for Lydia because she really tells it so well, but spoiler alert is that she got rescued and she's fine. She made it on to the interview today. But the reason we had her on is a couple different reasons. I mean, one, it really is an entertaining story. It's harrowing. It's not just a story about when things go wrong and life rafts and rescue at sea, but it really, what happens in the hours and days after an accident like this is really what makes the story so interesting and so gripping. But aside from the entertainment factor, to me, there's really an important educational factor. It's not what you'd expect. It's not a typical preachy, make sure you have your life raft and make sure you have your safety equipment on board. Lydia really gets into a lot of philosophical topics that really have me thinking about how I do my boating a little differently. And I think it's the kind of takeaways I really haven't heard before. Like I said, I'm going to take it with me in my boating career, and I hope you do as well. She's really got some great advice here. But before we jump into the conversation, I want to just give a quick word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Volvo Penta. With over a century of pushing boundaries in the marine industry, Volvo Penta delivers reliable and sustainable solutions for boaters and marine professionals worldwide. From their industry-leading IPS system offering superior maneuverability and fuel efficiency, to their innovative D4 and D6 marine engines, Volvo Penta has you covered. Experience enhanced features like joystick driving for precise control and the fully integrated glass cockpit display for a seamless navigation experience. Whether you're navigating calm waters or challenging the high seas like our guest today, trust Volvo Penta to provide the performance and reliability you expect. Visit volvopenta.com to learn more about their revolutionary products and services. Now, just a quick aside, just wanted to thank Volvo Penta for their sponsorship of the podcast. I was lucky enough to head over to Sweden last year and test out a lot of their new products, their hybrid propulsion system, their joystick driving, and these guys really are true game changers. Power Motor is proud that when IPS was first kind of trying to crack onto the scene and the world was skeptical, this three-letter word, IPS, how could that work? How could these 360 pods with a joystick, surely there'd be shortfalls. But we were there reporting from day one, and that's what makes me glad that Volvo Penta is our partner here today. Surely we'll keep you posted on all Volvo Penta has to offer in the years ahead. They always got a couple cool technologies in the offing. And now, without further ado, here's our conversation with Lydia Mullan. Lydia, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
We've been on a lot of different Teams calls over the years. I never really expected to be interviewing you, if that's fair. Not because you're not interesting, but this is just a different thing for us.
No, it's true. We kind of work in different worlds a little bit.
Yeah, the power and sail. I mean, we, obviously a long-standing blood feud, of course. Normally we hate each other, fist fights on the docks. But today you have a story to share, and it's interesting because I think of our job as editors, 99% of the time we're telling somebody else's story. We are, and I think the great writers, they don't insert themselves too heavily in their stories, right? It's we're using our skills to shine a light on somebody else, but you inadvertently found yourself in the throes of the story. You kind of very quickly became the story in the most recent Newport to Bermuda race. And I guess without further ado, let us know. I mean, maybe a little bit how you got into what you were hoping for out of the race and what happened.
Yeah. So I am a sailor. I've sailed my whole life, but my big kind of goal and trajectory is to get more into offshore sailing. And I really like being offshore. I really like kind of the adventure of it and having these longer campaigns and, going out there. And I've been sailing with a team based out of Newport on a J122 called Alliance for the past season and a half. And we've done over 1,000 offshore miles together, probably closer to 1,500. And so we know each other very well. We've sailed a lot together. And the Newport Bermuda was sort of one of the big focal points of our season this year, because it is one of the sort of biggest and most prestigious East Coast races. It would have been my first time. It was my first time. Our person in charge, it was his fifth time. We had a range of different experience levels with the race on board. We had a young woman on board who missed her college graduation to be there with us. We had a guy who was sort of our main technical person who had rewired a lot of systems on the boats, and he was in his 70s. And so we had a lot of breadth of experience on that team. And we all, had a very safety conscious approach. I think the people who own that boat, Mary Martin and Eric Irwin, are very intentional about how they run their program. They're very vigilant about making sure everyone has their training and making sure everyone is safe and making sure everyone knows where the ditch bag is, the first aid kit, who's taking their meds, when, what needs to be done on board. And to the credit of our watch captains as well, I mean, they're very good about being like, when's the last time you drank water? Have you taken your seasick meds? Are you, up on all that stuff? And so I think we went in with a very safety conscious, regimented, teamwork focused program. And I think we had every reason to expect that would have carried us through to the finish in good shape. And unfortunately, the best laid plan. So, we didn't make it. Because
I would say, I'm sorry, sorry to cut you off. Two background questions for our audience that might not be as sail familiar. What was can you describe the boat and the boat size that you were on and how many crew?
And sorry, how many what?
Yeah, how many people were on board for a race like this typically?
Yeah, so it really depends on how you're sailing the boat. We were sailing it with 9 people. 9 people is kind of as many as you'd want on a boat of that size. It allowed us to be in a 4-on, 4-off watch rotation that was staggered by 2 hours, which basically means that every 2 hours there are 2 new people on board, and you get 4 hours to sleep on, and then you come off and do some sailing. So it's quite an intense schedule, and you have to be very focused. And there's nothing else going on in your world when you're in that sort of watch schedule. And so that's 8 people, and then we have 1 person who's a floater, which means that they kind of are up whenever they're needed. The boat is a J122, which is roughly in the 40 feet category. So it's not a ton of space. We're hot bunking, which means that you don't have your own space. You don't have your own sleeping space. You come off watch and somebody else gets right into your bed, and you trade through, and everybody kind of does every job on board. Everybody has a specific role that they're assigned to, but when things need to be done, you do whatever. So I drive and I trim sails, but my main thing is that I'm up on the bow changing the head sails. So everybody does a little bit of everything on those boats, but not us.
No, that makes sense. I got to say that the term hot bunking is probably one of the most least appealing, repulsive phrases I've heard in a long time. It just sounds gross. But
and especially for a race like this, where you're getting into warmer and warmer latitudes as you go, the bed gets sweatier.
I'm gonna be sick. This is why people don't sail. But
I was sick. I threw up a lot.
Okay, well we're a few minutes in and we made it to the barf section. That's classic. Well, let me ask you this one more background question, just for my own understanding. The race distance. I mean, I know Newport to Bermuda is a long way. What is the distance? And sailors, you like to zigzag and go 2 knots. What was like a typical amount of time to do this race?
So I think typically, so it's like 650-ish miles. I think it's a little less than that, but I'm not exactly sure the distance. But you have to cross the Gulf Stream. So it's like this major feature in the middle of it. And there's a lot of tactics involved with the routing around that, and where you enter the Gulf Stream, where you exit, so that you're not fighting the current the whole way. And so it's never the race distance. It's always the race distance plus everything else. Typically, I mean, the boats range in how fast they're sailing it. But I would say the race starts on a Friday afternoon. A lot of the boats finish on Tuesday. So it's, a couple days.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, thank you for that background. So, I mean, maybe, take us to the start of the race. How did it start out, and where did we go from there?
Yeah. So, our start was a little bit later in the day on Thursday. I think we started a little after 3 p.m. And there was this system that was kind of coming up over the land, and we could see like a little bit of lightning, and we could hear thunder sort of rumbling, but it sort of seemed like it had stayed on the land and that it wasn't spilling out. But then towards the end of that day, as we kind of reached twilight, it did kind of roll over the water, and so we lost all our wind, and we were all just bobbing around for a couple hours. So it was a slow start to the race, but then things picked up. We had some tactical decisions, getting to Block Island, and there's a new wind farm out there that everybody has been talking about, how to do the routing around the wind farm. And that's kind of an active construction site, as well as being a massive wind shadow. And so if you sail, around it in one direction, you end up with no wind because it's obstructing all the wind. And so that was a big tactical point going into the race of like, how do you navigate that? And then we were pretty much in open ocean after that, headed for the Gulf Stream. We expected to hit the Gulf Stream around 10 p.m. On day 2. So that was kind of right when I was coming off watch. But one feature of the Gulf Stream is that because it's got this warm water, it accumulates a very unusual localized cloud pattern. So you can really see it from quite a ways off. There's like these big puffy clouds, and there's just a line of them. And it almost is like as if you're approaching land. And because the land is often warmer than the sea, it will have a similar cloud pattern actually to land. And so we had some really interesting like navigational features as we were approaching it. And then I think we ended up in like a little warm water eddy on the way there, which again was like a little slingshot and like brought us closer faster. And we entered the Gulf Stream around 10 p.m. I was off watch at 10 p.m. I was back on watch at 2 a.m. And I was put right up on the helm as soon as I got there. And the driving was kind of rough. The sea state was pretty big, in part because of the Gulf Stream, and in part just because of the wind and how rough it can be out on the open ocean. And I remember asking the watch captain that was on at the time, his name was Connor, and I remember saying to him, like, can we do short shifts for driving? Because it's going to be like pretty exhausting driving in these conditions. And he was like, yeah, for sure. Like, how much do you want? And I was like, give me half an hour. And so I was driving till around 2:30. And we got to 2:30, and he was like, how are you doing? And I was like, give me 10 more minutes. And within that 10-minute span, between 30 minutes and 40 minutes, we hit something. We were going around 12 knots at a time, which to you probably didn't seem very fast, but to a sailboat hitting...
You were idling. That's
yeah, we were drifting, just a little, an easy drift. We hit something very solid feeling, and it made like a horrible noise. The people who were down below actually thought that we had lost the rig, because it was such a loaded, tensioned, metallic noise. So while we didn't see what was in the water, we don't think that it was a whale or any sort of like marine life or anything like that. We really believe that we hit something that was like derelict, man-made object that was submerged. And we basically caught the rudder with it and ripped the whole rudder bearing out of where it was supposed to be mounted in the boat. We destroyed the grid that it's mounted in. And there's like a massive hole, fiberglass shards everywhere. And because the rudder post is still going through the hole, you can't put like a mat over it. You can't put a bucket or like any sort of patch situation over it, because there's a moving object that's still bobbing up and down within that space that you would want to be closing off. So there was a lot of water coming in and not a lot that we could do about it. And it was pretty obvious quite quickly to the people in charge that we were going to lose the boat.
Wow. But what happened next? What happens next? I'm like, I've heard this story before, and I'm on the edge of my seat.
Yeah. So what happens next is, I guess I and someone else who is also familiar with the bow, we went forward, pulled down our head sail because we didn't want to be moving faster than we were already. We left the mainsail up to give us some stability so that the rudder wasn't just bashing around and making that hole bigger. And unfortunately, we had a situation last season where we had water ingress issues. And so we had already had a little bit of a trial run for getting out the pumps and, where to hook them up and where to put them and how to do all of that. And we had a 3,000 gallon an hour pump and a 1,000 gallon an hour pump on board, and they were not keeping up. We had more than 4,000 gallons of water per hour pouring into that boat. And the pumps got us some time, and we were able to gather our things, get the boat computer, the sat phone. I had a lot of cameras on board that I was able to salvage, but all of our personal belongings were pretty much left there. Everybody got their passports, their cell phones, credit cards, things like that. So we did have enough time to sort of calmly figure out what needs to be done and take those next steps. And we made some distress calls. Our one of the boat owners, Mary, she was on the VHF and the sat phone, making the calls. And we heard later from one of the other boats that she had been so calm on those calls that they thought that she was calling in to say that, like, actually the EPIRB was like, an accidental triggering or whatever, because she was just like very level-headed about it. And I think that was really the tone at that moment. I think we were all definitely stressed, and it was like a high alert moment, but it wasn't a scary moment because our people in charge and everyone on board really did a good job of keeping their wits about them and kind of having that to-do list of like, okay, what needs to get done before we get off the boat and where do we go from there? So definitely stressful, but I would say not scary.
Wow. Amazing. What were you guys, were you just kind of wearing what you were wearing on deck in terms of like your foul weather gear? I got to imagine life, PFDs were put on immediately, or is that?
So we sail on that boat with PFDs on at all times, kind of as process. The race has some rules about that. There was someone lost overboard last edition of the race, and so they have some rules, and then we have our own set of boat rules about it that are a little bit stricter than the race rules. But essentially, anytime we're reefed, anytime we're sailing at night, people are always wearing PFDs and tethers. And then we basically wear them at all times unless there's like specific conditions where the people in charge say that we can take them off. But we're quite diligent about that, and always being clipped in, always being attached to the boat, because things happen fast out there. And especially in that kind of sea state, and especially at night, losing someone overboard would be absolutely devastating. That would be really, really difficult to find them again. And so we were very conscious about that sort of thing. We were kind of approaching warmer weather, so I don't think everyone was like in full fallies at the time. I think I was probably just in my bibs and a regular shirt, and we were able to like go below and get like at least jacket and pants for everyone. So it was, we weren't too bundled up, but definitely we were able to grab some of the extra stuff that we would have needed.
All right. So the distress call goes out, and take us from there. Yeah.
So the good thing about being in a race is there are a lot of other people nearby on the same course as you. And fortunately, there were two boats that were quite close to us. One was the J121 Kaylee, and the other one is an Archibald 40. Called Banter. And Banter is a family-owned boat, but the people on Banter have sailed many times on Alliance, and we're quite good friends with them. And it was really lovely to have them in the area and like hear them over the VHF. There's like a procedure to how you communicate on those calls, and it was a bit heart-wrenching to hear the voices of our friends, asking about like how many souls aboard and all of that. And honestly, like hearing yourself referred to as like one of 9 souls, like I know that's the way you talk about these things. I know that's the way they talk about maritime disasters. You can be prepared for it. But then when you're one of those, when it's you and your like very close friends and teammates are the souls aboard that vessel, like there's
like goosebumps.
You can never be prepared for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
it was tough. And so the J121 got to us first. That was Kaylee, and they had a crew of 7 on board at the time, and they basically got close enough that we were like, okay, we want to do a transfer to their boat. We launched the life raft, and getting on the life raft honestly was quite difficult. We had some stuff we were bringing with us because they only had 7 people. We were trying to bring more provisions and emergency water with us because they were not provisioned to have 16 people on that boat. Obviously, there's no way they could have anticipated something like that. And so we had like all of our necessary things to carry with us, but also provisions. And because of the sea state, the life raft has a drogue, and so it would sort of drift away from the boat, and then it would kind of surf down a wave and get closer to the boat. But we had, people holding onto it. You have people actively holding onto the life raft. And one of my biggest concerns throughout the whole maneuver was that they were going to get like dragged off the boat because the drogue was pulling it back faster, and they were really straining to keep it in place. And that was quite visceral to see them like really struggling to hold it close. But we disembarked to the life raft, and we only sat there. I think we were in the life raft for around 25 minutes all told. It wasn't like we were sitting in the life raft waiting and hoping someone would come by and pick us up. We knew that they were close by the time we got there. They made a couple laps, threw us a line, took a couple tries to get the line, and they pulled us in. And it was the same thing getting off the life raft, where we were sort of getting drawn into the stern of the boat, and they would just like yank someone off as soon as we got close enough, and then we get pulled back and then drawn in and pulled back. And there's sort of a rhythm to it, but you had to be ready when the ocean was ready, because you were not getting off that life raft when the waves didn't give you an opportunity. And because of that sort of slamming motion of like moving towards the boat and away from it, we ended up puncturing one of the tubes on the life raft. And so originally the plan was so that it was less impactful to the race of the crew that we were joining on their boat. We were going to split our crew in half. So half of our crew was going to go to Banter and half was going to stay on Kaylee. And unfortunately, because we ripped the life raft, that wasn't possible. And there was one cool head prevailing on Kaylee that was like, absolutely not. We're not putting anyone back in the life raft. You guys are stuck here. Like, it sucks for all of us, but like,
right,
not safe to do that. And we were all like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And Banter stayed quite close with us for the rest of the race, in case there was any support that they could have offered us. But we were 16 people in that space, and that was a long 52 hours, to be sure.
Well, wow. I mean, I guess I want to touch on the life raft situation for a second. I mean, I think one, it's worth noting that I think there were a lot of cool heads prevailing from this story, but you also continued shooting video and continued, doing your job as a reporter throughout. And that's not easy. Very, very impressive.
Yeah. I had one of my teammates afterwards say to me, he was like, yeah, we were all sitting in the life raft, like thinking about calling home, like worried about ourselves, and you were still at work. And I was like, yeah, maybe that's how I deal with my distress. But I had some good advice from an onboard reporter from the ocean race who I talked to last year. And I sort of asked him, I was like, what's an onboard reporter's job in an emergency? Like when things start to go wrong, and, what do you do? And he was like, your job is to tell a story. And just because there's a plot point you weren't expecting doesn't mean that like the story is not happening anymore. And like, unless there's something that you could be doing otherwise that's safer for someone else or makes a difference between someone getting injured or not, or getting someone into a life raft or not, or like if there's something you can do to be helpful that makes a difference, obviously do that. But if you're in a situation where like you're sitting there and there's a story to be told, like that's what you're there for. Yeah. As a reporter or a journalist, like go for it. And I think hearing that advice kind of came back to me then. He was like, just keep the cameras rolling. That's what we did.
Well, I know everyone in the group is extremely impressed, and there's some really gripping footage that you can see at on Sail's social channels and Instagram, Facebook at Sail Magazine, and on the website. I'm sure there's gonna be more content as well, but definitely give them a follow and check out some of this really harrowing footage. You made it sound so casual, like, oh, we're only in the life raft for 25 minutes.
We're going to stop during in that life raft. I mean, you were really in close quarters with the people in the life raft with you. And I basically posted the footage because I wanted people to stop asking me to see it, because every time someone sits down next to you and they're like, oh, can I see that? Then you have to watch it again. And I couldn't watch it one more time. And so I haven't seen it since I posted it, because it's really hard to see your teammates in a life raft. Like you feel it quite viscerally, especially like the looks on their faces. And, these are people you trust so much, and people who, when you're wet and cold and exhausted and like, sitting on the rail and you've got 3 more hours to like tough it out. Like those are the people that like, give you a handful of gummy bears, or they're the ones who relieve you off the helm when you're like really stressed and the conditions are too big, or, like these are people that, and experience stress with in a way that's unlike anyone else in your life. And, I have many close friends who I do not sail with, but I think the relationship with the people that you go offshore with is just somewhat different. There's like a level of trust, and there's a level of like just being so intimately aware of everybody else's way of processing things and what they will need, and whether, they want to be talked to keep them awake, or you have to shut up because they're going to be stressed and distracted if you talk to them, or, you just have such an intimate knowledge of how these people deal with stress and how they will react and all of these things. And, you're very close. You're like a family. And going back to that footage and like seeing these people that you care about and the looks on their faces when they're in a life raft. I mean, that's every boater's worst nightmare, is getting in a life raft. And it's hard to see. It's hard to see them like that.
This podcast is brought to you by Volvo Penta. With over a century of innovation under their belt, Volvo Penta understands what it means to provide people with the power that can take them as far or as deep as they want to go. With enhanced features like joystick driving and the fully integrated glass cockpit display, they help to provide you with the solutions to navigate the path ahead. Trust in Volvo Penta to provide the reliability and performance you can count on. Visit volvopenta.com to learn more.
Wow. I guess we're actually, I think, almost coming into, believe it or not, the more interesting part of the story. I mean, you would think, okay, your boat sank at sea, you got rescued in a life raft, and the life raft popped, which is its own sidebar. But your journey didn't end. I feel like in the powerboat space, a lot of coastal rescues, the Coast Guard cruises you home at 40 knots and you're in a marina. You didn't have that. You guys went through this harrowing experience into a life raft. Your journey had just begun.
Yeah, we were 2 days away from shore in either direction, and so the decision was made to keep racing. Was there ever any other alternative, or not really? You were so far out, it's like, well, going back doesn't really make sense. Getting another boat out to you so far offshore. There's no way anyone was going to come pick us up from that boat. I think the decision was pretty obvious. There was a moment where the 2 captains of the boats got together and they're like, well, what do we do? But it wasn't a long discussion. There were not options. And I think particularly because of where we were in the Gulf Stream, we couldn't have just turned around and gone the other direction. I mean, it wasn't, even if it had been 100 miles less to go that way, it probably wouldn't have been possible without having just like a really, really bad sea state and kind of horrible conditions, boat breaking conditions. And so there wasn't really anything else to be done. And then the other thing was, because their crew was still racing and competing, there was nothing for us to do on the boat. I mean, we were all like competitive sailors ourselves, and suddenly we're on this boat that's sailing competitively and like twiddling our thumbs with all of this adrenaline in our systems. And I think that was pretty tough for some people to just sort of sit tight and not touch anything and not, impact their racing, because in sailing we have a redress process. So if something goes wrong that's not your fault and you couldn't have anticipated, there's like a hearing at the end of the race and people will weigh in and you may be awarded time back for that. And actually that happened to Kaylee. So they spent, I believe, around 3 hours coming to get us. And then they did some calculation on their polars about how much time they lost by having 9 extra people on board, how much slower they were because of that. And they actually ended up on the podium in the race in third place because they got some time back. And so we were very careful to be respectful of their race and not be in their way any more than, we had to be. Obviously, everyone was in everyone else's way. We were like in each other's laps for 2 days, but yeah, it was tight. It was hot, and it's like pretty smelly to have that many people in that crowded space, and everybody's wet and everybody's like kind of, I don't know. It was just like, it was crowded conditions, and you hate to, I don't mean to sound like I'm complaining, because obviously like we're so grateful for what they did for us. And like, the sacrifices that they made for their own comfort in order to get us back. Right. Like they did such a phenomenal job of getting us onto that boat. And their driver at the time, I mean, when you're doing your rest and you put the engine on, and their driver at the time, he's like 29 years old. He's, I believe, the best driver on that boat. That's why they have to do that. He's trying to like find a life raft that he can't see and like not run us over. And like, you could just see the stress from him when we got on the boat. Like there's, a lot of people really stepped up in that. And so I don't mean to sound like, oh yeah, the conditions were bad during those 50 hours in any way that like blames them for anything. Obviously not. It's our fault for being on their boat that it was bad. But,
well, I'm gonna correct you on 2 points. One, it wasn't your fault that you're on their boat, but secondly, you can complain. Again, I would encourage anybody to head over to the Sail Magazine social channels, because I got to see some of your photos, and I'm going to ask you to even go a little deeper. If you can describe what conditions were like down below, and then also you say you had rations, but what are you eating and drinking? What do you paint that picture if you don't mind?
Yeah. So down below, basically the jam plane one is set up. So there's, an aft cabin on one side and a head on the other. But during this race, you're on the starboard tack for a long time, and the tanks don't work for their head on the starboard tack, just because of the way they drain. And so we were like using a bucket to flush the head. And we had, it's like kind of a standard size cabin, to port, and we had like 3 or 4 people sleeping there. There's pipe berths on the side, so it's like 2 sort of settees and then 2 pipe berths above them. And so people are,
if you just explain, I mean, these are barely bunks.
It's sort of like a sailor's version of like a cot. Maybe you use a line to haul it up, so it sort of like takes whoever's in it and sandwiches them sideways so that they stay in while the boat is bouncing around and slamming around in the waves, so that they don't go flying, or that like when you're at a heel you stay in. But basically, they like kind of close like a clamshell, and you get sandwiched in there.
I like to think of it as a really bad prison bunk. I mean, this sounds terrible.
But also the thing to remember is that like the boat slams. The sea state we were in, and like the way this boat is designed, like it was not surfing up and down in the waves. It was like every 3 seconds for 2 days, everything on board was like lifting up and then slamming down in a way that was like rattled your teeth a little bit sometimes. Like it was quite violent slamming at different points, depending on the conditions. But there was a time where I was like lying on the floor, and it was like me and 2 of the other guys from our team. And I was like, are we worried about like the water that's kind of like trickling in around the mast step? And the guy next to me, Eddie, he just goes, Lydia, I'm worried about a lot of things right now.
Oh, thanks, Eddie.
Oh my God.
Eddie the calm.
And Eddie is like we call him our chief morale officer. He is the happiest, most positive. Like he's the person who's always going to be there to like pick you up when you're tired and wet and cold and all the other things. And like just hearing him, he was like, I think this is the worst. And just hearing him say that was like really heart-wrenching. And it's not, not anything about their boat in particular, but like it's a lot of extra weight to have on the boat, and the conditions we were in were just like kind of slammy, and conditions like that. I mean, you basically get anywhere in a sailing race and everybody's on the dock fixing things and getting ready to get their boat back home, but things break on sailboats. There's a lot of really highly tensioned lines everywhere. Everything is, getting in the washing machine on the way over. And so I think, it was compounding factors, but it was definitely like a bit stressful, and like all of our, I don't know, everything was wet. All of our belongings were gone. Like nobody had a toothbrush. Nobody had, any of their like personal care items. And so it was just like, it was a lot. And we were trying to make sure that like they always had pipe birth. So when the date came off watch, they had a place to sleep that wasn't like the floor. But like I was way up in the bow. There's like a photo of 7 of us, and you can like barely see all 7 people because we're all just crammed in places. But like all the way up in the bow, and there was like this trickle of water that was like just dripping on my forehead for 2 days straight. But I was like a little seasick, and so having like the cool water on my face, I was like, okay, this is nice. I can make the best out of this.
You are an optimist. I'd be jumping off the back.
It was it was a long couple of days.
Wow. It's I mean, these photos, I mean, you really painted a great picture. I mean, it's just, the way I would describe it is there's just bodies all over the place. There's like people laying on people. I mean, it was rough. So I mean, take us to that moment where you see, I mean, Bermuda must, at that point, after all you've been through, must have looked like a cold rum drink on a hot day. It must have just been, how did the crew celebrate? What was that feeling when you came inside of land?
I think the first thing that maybe I should mention is that the Alliance crew has a lot of engineers on board. They have a lot of like STEM people and people who are like military or military adjacent. And so it's a lot of like very like high practicality, low emotional state people. And I think when we got on the boat, there was almost like a levity to the shock of losing the boat. And so I think the whole time we were on Kaylee, like nobody was like panicking yet. There was like sort of a jokiness to it. My friend Sam was like, oh, like my weekends for the rest of the summer really just opened up. Like, what are we gonna,
oh man.
There was a lot of like this sort of like banter throughout, but like very gallows humor. Like,
there
was a vibe on board, but as the days were on, that sort of ebbed away, and people were just kind of fraying. Like people were exhausted. People were like just wanted to be off the boat, and we all came up on deck for that finish, for when we were getting close to the line. And Bermuda's quite tricky to get into because there are reefs all around. So you sort of have to cross the line and then come back and around and make a loop of the island. So once we crossed the finish line, there was still like 2 hours. I don't know if 2 hours is I don't know what the number is. It felt like 2 hours to actually get to the place where you could come into the dock. And there was like what I can only describe as euphoria. Like people were so happy. We like had goldfish to eat that were in like a bag that was in rough shape, which was like a whole nother thing. There's their young driver, Austin. He just like immediately passed out. He basically like we crossed the line, and there's a photo of him like sitting in the cockpit like this and just like fast asleep for most of the ride in. And there was just like it was so celebratory, and it was just like this like relief to get back. And as we had other boats passing us that were like kind of coming into the channel and everything, Banter was right there with us. And that's the first time I cried, was like seeing our friends on Banter like come by, and they're like obviously like screaming for us, and like just to have them so close and to finally like be at the end of all of this. And like that was quite emotional for me to see them. And we had some jokes. I don't know that all of them are fit to print. But it was very celebratory. And, as we got in, the race committee was like, okay, who's that boat with the 16 people? Like, get them in here, like, get them in first. We kind of cut the line, and everybody, like, other people in the sailing world because, maybe you've crewed with them before, maybe you've met them at this event or that event, or, there's so much camaraderie within the fleet, and everybody kind of knows everyone else. And, as we were coming in, we were seeing so many friendly faces and people being just so relieved to see us and so like happy about it. And obviously like we would have done anything to come in under our own sail, under our own flag as we were, getting to that dock. But it was special to have the community really cheering for us as we came in and celebrating Kaylee's crew for everything that they did for us. And yeah, it was a lot. There were a lot of emotions, a lot of high emotions, and we were very glad to be back. But I was talking to Kenny the other day, yesterday, who is the editor of Yachts International. And he was there at the finish because he had been involved with the chase boat for that. And when I got off Kaylee, he sort of like pulled me onto this massive yacht with air conditioning and like puts a plastic water bottle in one hand and like a cell phone in the other. And he's like, call your parents. Yeah, you're right. But he said that someone who I had met with him on that boat kind of looked at him once I was like outside on the phone and was like, she's going to need to deal with this. She's going to need some therapy after.
Well, that's what this is. This is therapy at a discount. I have a very discounted rate. I'm going to send you the bill, but well, it's funny. I didn't know if we were going to mention our colleague Kenny Wooten again, the Yachts International editor-in-chief. He did the same. Hard to say the same trip you did, but he did a version of the Newport to Bermuda race on a Palm Beach 70.
Yeah.
And we were teasing him the other day. It was like, he had it rough too. I mean, he for almost an hour the ice machine was down and they had one bottle of rum left at the end. They really had to ration their stores. So two different sets of challenges, I think.
Two different adventures, but it's all in perspective.
Well, it's it is. This has been really an unbelievable story, Lydia. But I guess maybe the parting questions will be lessons for boaters. My head's spinning with them between being calm on the VHF, but then also that you had these pumps. I'm so interested in that because I think that is unique to sailing that you had these pumps that bought you so much time.
Yeah.
I guess from a safety perspective, what are some of the takeaways that went really well? And is there anything you could learn from? Anything that maybe could have been improved upon?
Yeah, I think that preparedness factor is huge, right? I think the fact that we knew where everything was, we knew like, okay, here are the pumps, here's how you attach them to the batteries, like having that knowledge ahead of time made a lot of things possible. There's a course that the race mandates a minimum number of people on your crew to have taken. It's a safety at sea course, and it's close to, I think, 15 to 20 hours of online coursework ahead of time, and then a day of practical training where you put out fires and you jump in a pool with your life jacket and you climb into a life raft and you shoot off flares and you do all these sort of practical things. And so I had taken that course maybe 2 weeks before this incident, and I was up on that safety certification, and Eric had been like, listen, like if we have a flare, I'm going to hand it to you because you shot flare most recently. And I was like, yep, I know what to do with that. And I think just having that sense of training ahead of time, I think allowed us to be very calm about it. There were no raised voices. There was no I don't know. It was all very action oriented. Yeah. When we were on that boat. And I think having the training ahead of time was a huge part of that. But you can't anticipate everything, right? There's going to be unknown factors. When something goes wrong, usually there are 10 things that go wrong around it. And you can't expect all of them. And, obviously we never could have expected hitting something in the middle of the ocean. And I think one of my big takeaways is in terms of the unexpected, in terms of the things you can't prepare for, there is no substitute for trust. There's no substitute for knowing the people on your crew and knowing their strengths, their weaknesses, who's going to, be feeling this, who needs these kinds of instructions for what needs to get done. And I think the fact that we had already sailed 1,000 miles together with those same people was huge, was indispensable when it comes to like us knowing what to do and how to support each other and all of that. So I think, there's this tendency to say like, oh, that's a really cool boat and they're looking for an extra person and I'm an extra person. I really want to do that race. And not that you shouldn't take opportunities like that, but I would not have wanted to be in that situation on a boat that I didn't know well with people that I didn't know well. I think everything could have been much worse if, one, we weren't prepared, and two, we didn't have that sense of like trust and team team support. I think both of those things were huge.
Lydia, you're really sparking a lot of thoughts that I have around that. That's such great advice, and I think really unsung advice. I see all the time on social media, kind of like what you were saying. It's somebody is doing an offshore delivery and just shouting out to Facebook, "Hey, I need crew," and
I do it all the time.
Yeah, I look at these tweets. Well, I guess it's different, right? It depends. This is not hey, I'm taking my boat across the Block Island, but if you're doing, sometimes you see these calls for crew, major offshore deliveries, and hearing your story, and it's like, well, if we're in an emergency with somebody I don't know, I've met on Facebook, that is kind of terrifying to think about it from that point of view.
Yeah. And my job, every time I go out on assignment, I pretty much get on a boat with people I don't know who are,
guilty. Yeah.
Hopefully have prepared their boat well, hopefully are not going to have any major issues with it. And, I typically don't know most of the people I sail with before I go sailing with them. And that's sort of how this world works, right? Like that's how so much of reporting story, but also like how you get your miles, how you get your practice, how you join a race that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do. And I don't think my advice is that we shouldn't be doing that, but I think there's a gut check about like when you meet that crew, it's like, can they tell you about all these things? Are you asking the questions when you're getting on the boat about, making sure that you can contribute positively in an emergency situation, right? Like you get on that boat and maybe they are trustworthy, but maybe there's a fire and you don't know where the fire extinguisher is because you're just going to be on it for one day or a couple of days during delivery. And you don't, I think knowing what you don't know, asking questions, doing that like personality gut check of like, do these people seem like they can be trusted with my life? Because that's what it is. That's what it is when you go out there. And I feel that way about everyone in the crew. And I would hate to have been in that situation with a crew I didn't feel that way about.
Yeah, I just want to, I think maybe reiterate what a great takeaway that is. Because as you're saying that, I think back to the many times that we've same thing through work have gotten on boats, and you gotta trust your gut sometimes. There's been opportunities where you see in a briefing meeting a captain that's experienced versus somebody who's not, and then maybe having the guts to stand up if you feel like you're getting yourself in a bad situation going offshore, to say, hey, you know what, actually guys, something came up, I'm out of here. It's not easy, but better than the alternative, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. And like you can do some of that homework ahead of time, and you can have a call with them. You can ask your questions. You can ask about their certifications. You can ask to see their resume. I mean, there are things you can do to help get to know those people. We throughout the whole off season had regular Zoom calls with the Alliance crew. So even the people that I was sailing with for the first time this season, I already had like some context for who they are. And during those meetings, they would give us homework and they would say, watch these 3 hours worth of weather briefings and content, and then we'll give you a pop quiz on that. So I knew that people on the boat were people who did their work. I knew that they had been paying attention. I knew that they had, that kind of training and experience. And, did everyone get every question right all the time? No, people have busy months, people have, whatever. But I knew that there was an expectation of this sort of awareness and safety and just kind of like buy-in from the crew about like how we were going to conduct ourselves. And I think that went a long way to everybody staying safe and calm in that instant. Well,
these are truly great takeaways. I guess my last question, and it's awfully soon. We're recording this on a Wednesday. You got home.
I got
maybe home Monday morning, 2 a.m. Yeah. Actually, I loved your line. You said you had a hellish travel. Your flights got canceled. You're on the tarmac. I loved your line of second worst travel experience of the week. Was just really spoke to your sense of humor and ability to roll with the punches. This really, in the scheme of things, this really just happened. But as you're processing this, do you going to ask the question? I mean, you going to go back? Is there something left to be conquered, or are you thinking next year maybe the Palm Beach 70 is more of your calling?
I think we have a redemption arc left in us. I think that for a lot of us, this was our first time doing this race, and I think I think there's something left on the table. I think we we have, probably not all of us together in the same boat, because I don't know what that looks like in the future. I don't know who we'll do it with, but I would be shocked if we weren't all back for more in 2 years when the race happens again.
Wow. I've had goosebumps because of negative parts of this story before, but I actually I can't really say, but I actually have positive goosebumps this time. That's really incredible, and I hope to follow that story. Can you real quick tell people, where, how to subscribe to Sail, where to follow your stories, and because this is, you guys at Sail are doing some really incredible work. Where can people follow you?
Yeah, so we're sailmagazine.com, and then you can find us on Instagram or Facebook at Sail Magazine. Pretty simple. And we have an e-newsletter that goes out on weekdays, every weekday. So that's another way to follow us if you really want a lot of sailboat content.
Yeah, excellent. I said it in a couple of our calls, but now I think for the record, with the millions of people listening around the world, I just wanted to say, A, glad you're safe. Extremely impressed by the reporting you came out with this but more than anything, the level-headedness and professionalism you showed in an emergency scenario is just seriously impressive. So thanks for all the great work. Can't wait to read what you write about it.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, Lydia, thank you very much for your time, and welcome back to Dry Land.
Thank you.
This episode was brought to you by Volvo Penta. Whether you're cruising calm waters or challenging heavy seas, trust Volvo Penta to provide safe, innovative, reliable marine solutions made to move you, wherever the journey takes you. Visit volvopenta.com and explore their innovative marine and industrial products and services.